10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier, here with you on No Soundbites Allowed, our podcast, and we hope you enjoy it. Today we're going to be talking about a very touchy subject, a very hot button issue, talking about the issue of abortion. Now, because of the nature of the issue, and because I don't feel like being yelled at all day long, that I'm just a man so I don't have a voice, which I don't agree with. We're in America. Everyone has a voice. But because of that, I'm just doing this as a recording, and if there is enough interest on the issue, I will do this either on my Thursday 1 p.m. show or on Saturday, where there's more of a Q&A and feedback from the public. So you let me know if you want to talk about this subject a little bit more. Very specifically, I want to talk about the bill that came out, the decision by the Supreme Court on May 28th that just came out. And the Supreme Court was dealing with the Indiana case of abortion being banned on the basis of sex, race, and disability. There was a second issue that was also involved in the case, which was based on the issue of if a unborn baby, a fetus, has been aborted, what to do with the body. And so let's address that part first, because that's actually the easier part to address, and it's a lot more simple. The Supreme Court agreed that a fetus needs to be disposed of, buried, not treated like trash. You can't treat a fetus, an unborn baby that has been aborted, like needles or other medical supplies. You can't just throw it out in the trash, the medical trash. It would need the dignity of having a burial. I don't think a lot of people would have an argument about that, although they probably would, because if you accept that a aborted fetus, a baby, unborn baby that has been aborted, has been buried or needs to be buried to be respectful, then that brings in the question, well, if we're respecting it in its death and how it's being buried, there is the question about what about when it is alive? Is it therefore get the same respect in the womb? That is an argument I'm not going to have right now. That's not a discussion that we're going to go into, but that is part of the reason why we're hearing a lot of pundits, a lot of people who are reading into the case that are saying, well, they don't know if they agree with this, and part of the reason why I went to the Supreme Court, because it is a precursor, potentially, for many people to Roe versus Wade. By the way, if you're wondering what is the title of the case, it is actually Christina Box versus Planned Parenthood of Indiana. And again, if you're looking it up, you would be looking for Box, B-O-X, v. Planned Parenthood of Indiana. And that's how you will find the case, and you'll be able to look at it. It is also under the docket number 18-483. Now, I know very often nobody ever hears, and this is one of the things I always hate. You never get to hear or find out what is the docket number, what is the bill number when they put in the legislation, so that you can look it up for yourself and read and find out what is actually going on. We like to make sure you know what's going on. So if you want to read the decisions by the Supreme Court and the opinions by the members of the Supreme Court, please go ahead and look it up that way. We are referencing it here, and you're going to see it in just 1 second. So generally, if you're looking at it, so under Politico, we had the article which comes from Supreme Court upholds ban on abortion law signed by Pence. So that's not exactly correct. They upheld part of the ban. And it doesn't matter that it was done by Mike Pence. The fact that he's vice president, that's just eye candy. That's just meant to clickbait you into clicking on it. Who cares about that? The issue is about the abortions. Can you have an abortion, or should we allow abortions, if someone is aborting that child based on the sex, the race, or the disability of that baby? That is the real heart and soul of the question. And this is why people are very upset and wondering whether or not this is going to bring back Roe versus Wade. As I mentioned, the one part of the case is about the burial of that unborn child that has been aborted. And that gives you an indication of where the court is leaning. If they believe that an unborn, aborted child needs to be buried, well, then they're more likely to believe that that unborn child, while it is alive, has a right to life. Again, whether you agree with this or not, this is the leaning, this is the understanding that you may get from the court case. So the question comes down to the case itself. And in the case, there was a decision that was made by Justice Thomas. Justice Thomas had a concurring. He agreed with the court in its split decision, both in understanding what to do with the burial of those unborn children, or to, and the second part, which is that they did not hear the case about whether or not you can abort a child based on the sex or possible disability of that child, or the race of that child. Now, this is the exact ruling. This is his commentary on why he believes in this. And part of his comments are in reference to eugenics. Eugenics is, and I'm going to get into what is eugenics in just a second, but his basis is this is a form of eugenics, and this is negative. This is something we would oppose. And obviously, it's really not that long. It's just the way that they do the Supreme Court rulings and how they put the readings out there. It's actually a lot shorter if you were actually to put it into a full page format. But the thing I wanted to quote here is, in his concurrence, the quote that I think is important is when he says, Justice Thomas states, quote, enshrining a constitutional right to an abortion based solely on the race, sex, or disability of an unborn child, as Planned Parenthood advocates, would constitutionalize the views of the 20th century eugenics movement. In other contexts, the court has been zealous in vindicating the rights of people, even potentially subjected to race, sex, and disability discrimination. I think that is a very powerful statement, and it's a very important statement because it takes the question of abortion into a very unique royal realm, and something that is not often spoken about that I think is very important. I did touch on this once before. In fact, back in, I was writing about this back in, where is it? Sorry, I have a lot of notes here in front of me because of this subject and the nature of this subject. And there it is. And I spoke about this back actually in 2011. And I'll come back to this again when I was speaking about the article, which can be found on my website, the Voss Political Commentary. It's Abortion and Race, the Ads and the Law. The article is from March 30th of 2011. And talking about the question is there a racial component to the disproportionate number of abortions found in the African American population, which is essentially the same question that's being addressed by this law in Indiana. Actually, I'm going to get into, it's not only just in Indiana, but in Arizona as well, where the Arizona law has stood up. But let's actually address something before I get into any of that. Let's go back and take a second here. What is eugenics? People have probably heard it before. You've even probably heard that Sanger, the woman who created the Planned Parenthood, that she was a eugenicist. Well, eugenics is basically the manipulation of a group of people on the basis of selective breeding. Call it selective breeding. That's essentially it. Eugenicists believe in selective breeding for races to maintain purity or to reach excellence. But it's basically just selective breeding. It is a failed pseudoscience that many people have found that in the last century, at the beginning of the last century, that they were very much into, in the early 1900s, 1920s, in that range. And that was what Sanger, who created Planned Parenthood, believed in purity of races, and that one of the means to do so, essentially, is by controlling those who are born. And abortions are part of that process. Again, we're summarizing a lot of things here. I am actually trying to go through this quickly because I want you to look into this and see it for yourself. So one of the questions that comes up with eugenics, if we're looking at this question, is it okay to abort a baby based on physical differences, like the color of that child, the sex, and also the disability, which could be Down syndrome, but also it could possibly be, based on recent science, it could be same sex. So there is, according to, and this is the sciencenews.org, and this is from October 20th of 2018, the article is DNA differences are linked to having same-sex sexual partners. Now, mind you, this has nothing to do with being gay. This is that someone can have sex, because not everyone who has sex with someone of the same, they're having intercourse with someone of the same sex, doesn't make them necessarily gay by the scientific definition here. So they found that there are certain genetic markers in a very large group of people. I believe it was 140,000 people that were 490,000 men and women from the United States, United Kingdom, and Sweden were in this study. Okay, so it's a very large study that was done, researched and checked on by MIT, Harvard, in reviewing this, and it was released at the American Society of Human Genetics meeting. So it's a scientific study, very strong, saying that there could be, not that there is, but that there could be a correlation between genetics and having sex with someone of the same sexes, or being sexually intimate with someone of the same sex. So here's the question. We are finding more and more ways to have genetic markers that identify things like Down syndrome, or even things like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cleft chins, dyslexia, all of a bunch of maladies and disfigurements and things that could affect someone's life. Genetic issues that could affect someone's life. And we're able to find them. And now, once you are able to find that, does that mean, or is it okay if someone, upon finding out that your kid is going to have a cleft chin, will become dyslexic, will be possibly gay, and or have sex with other members of the same sex, is it okay for that parent to then abort that child? Is it okay if they say that their child is going to be black, white, Asian, whatever? And is it okay, will they be able to abort that child on that basis? For no other reason, just that, well, they're going to have a difficult life because they're going to be disfigured, or they're going to have Down syndrome, or they're going to have dyslexia, or they're possibly going to be gay. Is it okay if someone said, well, let me abort that child because of that reason? That's a really tough question, which is why Justice Thomas goes and says, well, we need to answer that question. Since we have abortion, since that is a reality in the world right now, we need to answer that, because we have laws in place that say you can't mistreat someone just because they're disabled. Just because someone is dyslexic, or just because they have a cleft chin, they have a deformed arm, just because they have Down syndrome, doesn't mean that you can discriminate against them, nor can you do it because of someone's sex or gender or religious and so on. We have these laws in place. You can't discriminate. Is it discrimination to end the life of a unborn child, a fetus, based on those same factors that you could not discriminate against if that person were alive, if they were born? That's a very big question. And there have been a lot of famous people who have some of these issues, who have deformities, that have gone on to live great lives. And you can go to the disabledworld.com and you can check this out. And they have a listing of dozens of people, amputees, individuals with Asperger's, asthma, autism, cleft chins, club feet, dementia, dyslexia, and so on. And I just went through and I actually took a quick look just at, for individuals who had clefts. That would include Jesse Jackson, Cheech Marin, and Joaquin Phoenix. Imagine, it is possible now, potentially, to have a DNA test and determine that those children could have that. And if you had a parent who thought that that would be too much of a burden, that they would have this cleft, that they would not be able to get married or to go out amongst friends, to be able to get jobs, because life would be difficult for them because they have the physical imperfection, they could abort that child. Would that be right? And deny the world a Jesse Jackson or Joaquin Phoenix or Cheech Marin? What about dyslexia? Something millions of people deal with, a very disabling problem, making it very difficult for people because they can't read. And you're talking about people like Agatha Christie, Alexander Graham Bell, Nelson Rockefeller, Winston Churchill, even a president, Woodrow Wilson, were all individuals, just a small group of people who were affected by dyslexia. And even though they were having trouble learning through traditional means, that they had this difficulty. And imagine if we had the ability to understand the DNA in the past, and those parents were given the challenge and said, hey, you know what? Your child's going to have dyslexia. They're always, forever going to have a difficulty in being able to read and to write, whether it's numbers or letters. And this may hold them back, to restrict their potential. Do you want to abort that child and deny the world the books of Agatha Christie, the success and the opportunity that Nelson Rockefeller gave our nation, the strength that was needed for the United Kingdom and for the world from Winston Churchill? What about Woodrow Wilson, Alexander Graham Bell on the phone? These are things that we could never have without the, well, I can't say never would have, but the world would be that much less without these individuals. And again, this is just a small group of individuals. What if it were okay to destroy those unborn children before they ever were born? Would that be okay? That is the question that faced the Supreme Court and continues to face the Supreme Court. That is the question that will be the next Roe versus Wade. Not that you can or cannot have an abortion, but what are the circumstances, and this is my opinion, what are the circumstances surrounding that abortion? Is this based on your preference, your prejudice against what that future child will have to deal with? What if that child is prone towards, what if we find out the genetic markers that indicate addiction, and your child may be prone towards addiction, whether that be alcohol, opioid, other illicit drugs, tobacco, sugar? What if they're prone to that addiction, which could be anything from, in the items I just put out there, that could be anything from obesity to drug addiction and possible overdose death? Is it okay to abort a child for those reasons? Because they have the potential for that? That is a question that's coming up. That, I believe, is the question that the Supreme Court will be facing. And when we do face a question like that, and it does involve also race and gender and especially in our modern society where we're dealing with gender and identity politics, then you have to consider that. And especially, as I saw in 2011, we saw that it is affecting us. I mean, you're seeing that from 1974 to 2000, the number of abortions grew by 76% in the nation. African Americans are the largest category from 1990 through 2006, from ages 15 to 44, that have outpaced every other group in getting abortions. And I have no reason to believe that that number has changed since that time in 2011 when I wrote this article. That in that time, again, this is from 2011, we were seeing indications that roughly 50.2 women per 1,000 of African Americans, the lowest rate of abortions, was 50.2. The highest for white women, white women, was 21.5. The highest of all races combined is 27.4 for every 1,000 women in 1990. The lowest number of African American women, their abortion rate was 50.2. More than double. And this is a question we have to ask ourselves. Are we going to see these numbers, these trends, this eugenics continue if it is being applied at this time? And we have every reason to believe it could. People may abort a child because of Down syndrome, and they do at this time. Some people may and do abort children because the child will not be able to live a perfect life. Whether that is a large number or a small number is an entirely different question, but the question isn't that. The question is any life. These are things that any life. We have laws against that anyone cannot be discriminated against if they are born on these bases. So can we allow any life to be aborted on that basis? In Arizona, back in 2000, I believe it was 2011, there was a case which went to the courts. And nope, that's not it. I want to get it for you so that you can look this up. I was doing a lot of research on this. And it was sued by the ACLU and everyone else. But it was, here it is. So in 2011, in February 21st, 2011, the Arizona state government passed a law, which was HB 2443. Let me say it again. HB 2443, that was passed, and it was signed by Governor Jan Brewer. That law said you could not knowingly have an abortion based solely on the race and gender of the child. It didn't have the component of a disfigurement. That case has gone, and that was challenged by not only the ACLU, but it was also challenged all the way up the courts by the NAACP. Essentially, they fought for the right. They believe that it is okay for someone to have an abortion based on the color and gender of the child. That's essentially the fight. That is the argument. That is the argument that the NAACP is fighting for, what the ACLU was fighting for. This is what they're fighting for. The ability of a woman or a parent, whomever is making the decision, that this individual is okay to decide to abort a child based on the fact that that child will be black or Asian or Hispanic or white, that they will be able to abort the child based on the fact that it is male or female. And looking at the greater issue now, because of the Indiana court case, we will see the question of whether or not that child has Down syndrome, whether they have asthma, whether they have dyslexia, or may at one point in their life have dementia or addiction. Is it okay to abort that child? And the answer is, you are either fighting for someone saying, yes, you can kill that life because they will be, or potentially may be, these physical attributes, or they may potentially not live the same full life as everyone else. Or you're on the side that says, no, you can't abort a child because of that reason. That is not a reason, which has nothing to do with the health of the mother. It has nothing to do with the income. We're not talking about those things. We're not even talking about the late-term abortion issue, which many people feel went overboard, especially in states like New York, or even the post-abortion issue, like Governor Northam has said over in North Carolina. We're not addressing that. We're not saying that this is something about the health of a mother. We're not talking about rape. We're not talking about incest, which represent less than 1% of all of the abortions that happen in the nation. No, we're talking about, this is a preference. This is someone's choice. They are making a choice, not because this was forced on them, but because they choose to. And they are saying that, we don't know what the numbers are, but the fight is, if you believe that it's bad to have a child that has this skin color, this gender, this physical or mental disability, that you can kill them, that you can destroy that life. That's a very difficult question. And I'm not posing a yes or a no. I have my own preference, whatever it may be. It doesn't really matter. We're having a discussion, and that's the challenge. And that's truly the question for the future. Not Roe versus Wade. This is the question. This, I believe, will be the true question. And everyone who argues Roe versus Wade and will Roe versus Wade be overturned, I think they are misdirecting people. Both those who say that it should be overturned and those who are saying that it can't be overturned, they're misdirecting you. They're misleading. Because the question at this point in our society is not whether or not there should be abortion. There are, I think most reasonable people can agree that within some limits, we can accept that as a society. Not in the 9th month. Most of us do not agree with the late-term abortion. But I think most of us, especially in cases of incest and rape, some other circumstances, that we can understand that. That even the most religious do agree with that. And I'm not even religious to really go in that respect. But I think most of us can deal with that. The question is going to come down to, the reality is going to come down to a question of, is there a criteria that someone is using to value that life, to give it a value, a judgment, and saying that if you cannot equal X, you do not deserve to be alive. And the reason why I find this to be very, very challenging, and why the case, which we brought up, which is Horn, which I was showing you just a second ago, I'll show it again, which is Horn versus the NAACP versus Thomas Horn, who was acting on behalf of the state of Arizona. And this went, the ACLU fought against it, the NAACP fought against it, it went to the 9th District Court, and in each case, the ACLU, the NAACP, they lost. And in the state of Arizona, at this moment, as of my best knowledge, it is current that the law stands, HB 2443. It is illegal to knowingly commit an abortion when you know that that child is being aborted because of the sex or the gender of that child. So if someone can't stand or does not believe that another white male should be born into the world and they're going to have a white male child, it would be illegal in the state of Arizona to abort that child because there will be yet another white male. And you could say the same thing against white females, black males. And if our technology improves and we are able to identify that, what if they're saying that about a straight male, a straight female, someone who may potentially become transgendered later in life. The implications based on our silence and our understanding grows and grows. And so this is a question that if we don't answer it today, we must answer it soon. And that goes right along with what Justice Thomas said. This is the question of the future. This is the question we must answer. And we don't have it yet, but we do. We must have it. So I bring to you, and again, depending on how much discussion there is, I'll do an entire show on this and bring in live people, have your thoughts and discussion on it. But this is what the Indiana case is talking about. This is what it really is talking about. And it's not Roe versus Wade. It's the future. And this is what we really need to decide on. This is what our future question is going to be. And wherever you fall on the line, I want to hear your thoughts. But please make it respectful and let's have an open discussion. Let's understand where are the pros and cons without insulting each other, without attacking me for raising the question. With that said, I thank you and I look forward to seeing the responses. This is Michael Voss, and I hope everyone will be well.